Hi, welcome to Steaming It Up Anywhere. I'm Kristin Brynteson from NIU STEAM. And with me today, I've got Scott James from Sterling. Hi, Scott.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I can't complain.
Good. So what do you teach over in Sterling?
I teach math and science, fifth grade.
Now, you and I have talked before about some of your approaches to fifth grade math and science, and you use a lot of problem-based learning with your students. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the projects you have them do?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence, the analytical, the practical, and the creative. So what I try to do is create these authentic tasks um, based off of the old open-ended extended response math problems that used to be on the standardized Illinois test back in the day. And they have to incorporate words, pictures, and numbers to solve the problem. And that starts off with like a basic story, which leads into the problem. It can be just about anything. And then with it being open-ended, there's multiple approaches to solving it. They could use repeated addition, multiplication. They might have to do multiple steps. So it kind of levels the playing field for math students.
When it kind of gives them a purpose for doing the math, right? 'Cause I
Yeah,
know.
and they make stronger connections with it.
So give an example. I know you've designed a few. What are some of the stories or scenarios that you set up for your students?
For one example, when I go into fractions, I've got Mad Batter's fractured sugar cookies. Uh, and it starts out with like the story, Montel, the owner of Mad Batter Bakery, needs your help, exclamation point. He has had 4 different orders of sugar cookies come in last minute. The first order is a half order, the second is a double batch, the third order is a quadrupled batch, and the fourth was to be 7 times greater than one batch. Below is Montel's secret recipe for one batch. Use the measurements below to help Montel calculate how much ingredients are needed for each order. For extra credit, calculate the total ingredients for all 4 orders. And that's the basis. And then I give them the recipe, and then they go to work.
So what are some of the different ways you see students solving them? Because it sounds like there's not just one path to solutions. Do you have some sketch and draw, some write and use
That's
equations?
where and attached is usually a rubric, and it's simplified words, pictures, and numbers. So let's say that they can use pictures to do the math. The words they have to explain in a page how they solve the problem, what steps that they took, because I find that students have a hard time writing to explain math or how they did the math. So there's that written component to it. And then the numbers, them actually doing calculations. And if they incorporate all 3, they get full credit. So it's interesting to see how their approaches are. Some will start out with a picture and then realize, well, okay, I can't use a circle fraction on this. It's better to use a bar, and break it up into using a bar model. So it's interesting to see their thought process when they go into it and how it changes. And it opens up a lot for discourse, them talking and figuring out that cooperative group work, because a lot of times I'll pair them in groups of 4 with these activities.
I can imagine too, it makes it easier to start identifying where they might have some misconceptions because you're
Yeah.
kind of
Oh, yeah.
seeing their thought process.
Well, and I group them not by their ability. I stagger it. So it's interesting that uh, students that are more advanced in math oftentimes will overthink the problem, and the student that isn't nearly as strong, maybe with multiplication, will ask a question or ask or propose, hey, well, couldn't we do this? And it leads the other students down a simpler path and brings them back because they're totally overthinking their approach to the problem and what the problem is actually asking.
I can imagine that for some kids where math seems really difficult, putting it into that narrative and making it more connected to real world instead of just solving equations is also helpful.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because a lot of kids will be, oh, well, you know what? I bake with my great gam. Oh, yeah, well, we've had to do that. We've done a half a batch, or we've done, 3 times, and this is how we did it. So they're bringing those connections that they have in real life to the problem, and again, it opens up discourse because there's kids that have never baked before, and then you hear them explaining, well, this is what this is, and their approach, and it's nice seeing those connections.
So are you using a similar strategy as you're kind of now that we're working remotely? Is it working in this remote environment, or are you kind of changing up your strategy a little bit?
The remote environment, it's difficult
Hmm.
because instead of having that cooperative group work, um, I am still posing these problems, but the discourse is delayed.
Hmm.
We Zoom meeting every day, and students ask each other questions, and we can do breakout rooms. But then trying to monitor all of the breakout rooms in fifth grade is a little bit more problematic. So we moved more to a whole group discussion. Oh, what was your approach? And how did you tackle the problem? And more sharing out that way. Some students have, without having that cooperative group work, um, have had struggles starting, failure to launch,
Hmm.
because they're like, okay, they're they don't have that person to go, well, this is what I think. What do you think? And it's kind of, they've been hesitant at first to start, but as we've gotten used to this remote learning experience, we've started to break through that plug. So
So how did you get started? Like, where did this idea come from about connecting a rich narrative to math? And what tips would you give to teachers who want to start incorporating projects like this?
well, where this started was many moons ago, when I taught in DeKalb. I taught with a partnership school with NIU, Wright Elementary School, and we integrated art, technology, uh, using Sternberg's triarchic theory of intelligence. And I loved it because you're teaching to students' strengths and strengthening their weaknesses. Each student is either one or two of those intelligence, but they're not all three. So not only are you playing to their strengths, but you're strengthening their weaknesses by developing these problem-based lessons, even cross-curricular, incorporating those three intelligences. You're kind of teaching to their strengths, strengthening their weaknesses, and getting a really good end product and making those stronger connections.
And the kids, I think, respond to it pretty well.
Yeah, they love it. It's challenging. It's not only challenging for them, but once they get going, all of a sudden you can see the light bulbs going off, the aha moments, like, oh, yeah, if I do this, um, connecting with patterns, seeing patterns with numbers, things like that. It's math, but it's kind of camouflaged.
So, what kind of tip would you give teachers who want to start incorporating this? Where can they go to find narratives or create their own?
I would just see. I've always been creative, so I've always kind of thought outside of the box. Just think of things that are in everyday life and make a fun story. Make it a fun narrative. Bring in creative writing. Uh, be silly with the names. The kids love that kind of stuff. Um, I've done stuff with area and perimeter and volume. For example, I made the janitor part of a story where he needed our help. We went to the storage room, did a class field trip to the storage room. We looked at the pallet full of cases of Coke or cases of soda, and we had to figure out the fractions of the soda. And, you know, how many cases of Fanta, how many Diet Cokes, how many Mountain Dews, how many, you know, different cases. And they had to figure out the different fractions. And, well, what is a case? What, you know, to understand the part, you have to understand the whole. A whole case, well, what's the part in the case? Well, there's 24 parts to a case. And just activities like that, figuring out the volume of the cafeteria was another project I did that towards the end of the year, one year. The janitor, again, was my go-to. He needs to fill the classrooms, teacher stuff, in one area to clean the rooms and to do the floor. He needs to know how much stuff he could put in the cafeteria. So we got ladders and we measured the ceiling, the wall, it figured out the volume of the cafeteria in cubic feet. So there's stuff all around. It's just seeing that diamond in the rough and brushing it off and polishing it into one of those narrative, you know, problems.
Well, and I think that's some tips then for parents at home as well, is just having these conversations and talking about, you know, people are like, well, I'm not a math person, or I just don't do math, but really people are doing math every day. And just by
Yeah.
talking about, you know, grocery shopping, toilet paper, you know, there's so many ways that we could work math into those conversations.
Okay, we talk estimation.
Hmm.
And I told my students this. I go, I estimate all the time. You estimate all the time. You know, I go to the store. I kind of have a rough estimate of what I have in my account and how much I can afford to spend on groceries. So as I am pulling the stuff off the shelves, in my mind, I'm rounding it up. I usually don't round it down because I have to figure in tax, sales tax, and all of that. But I round up to the nearest dollar, and usually within 10 to 20 bucks, I'm right in that pocket. So, and that's giving them, this is where I'm going to use estimation or rounding. This is where I'm going to use volume. You know, this is where I'm going to use fractions. Uh, Instead of just sitting in the classroom going, okay, here today we're going to be adding fractions. Let's find our common denominator. Well, why do you need a common denominator? You
Yeah,
know,
I think it's finding that why. Why are we doing
why?
this? Why do
Why?
I need to know?
And you're giving them the why. You know, you're through that authentic task. You're showing them why they need to know this. You know, what if you wanted to put a fence around your yard? Well, you're going to need to know the perimeter. You're going to need to know the measurement. You're going to need to know, you're going to have to convert measurement. You're going to have to figure cost, you know?
I I I really think it's important that we get our students thinking about math being everywhere, and it sounds like you've got some great strategies for that. So, you know, thank you so much for sharing, and any
No
kind of
problem. Thank you for having me.
last tips or ideas for parents and teachers out there who want to be more storytelling in their math.
Just look at what's around you and what you do every day that incorporates math and make it a fun activity. May, you know, we used to tell stories to our wee ones. That's all you're doing is making a creative story, but incorporating a math problem.
Great. Well, thanks, Scott.
Ain't no problem. Thank you.
Yeah, take care.